So what's interesting about the Arduino is it sees the world differently to how we do. And by understanding how it sees it, we can get it to do what we want. So let's just explain a couple things. There are two main ways for an Arduino to interact with the world. There's the inputs and the outputs. And just as they're said, one goes into it, one comes out of it. So I'm going to relate this along to how we interpret the world along the way so that we can get some context here. Inputs give awareness of the world. It's what we can detect. For us, it's sight, touch, hearing. For microcontrollers, these are called sensors. An example would be a light sensor, which detects light. Another one would be a temperature sensor that detects temperature. And a piezo sensor that can detect vibration. So that's outside things getting into the microcontroller. On top of that, the microcontroller or Arduino can also interact with the world. For humans, this is motor controls, such as moving our arms or our ability to speak. For a microcontroller, these are called actuators. An example of this would be a motor that allows us to move something. Another example would be a speaker that allows us to create sound. For each of these inputs and outputs, there are two types, digital and analog. Digital has two states, either on or off, sometimes referred to as 1 or 0 because it's digital representation. Example of a digital input would be a button. The button is either pressed or not. A digital output would be a light. Again, it's either off or on. So we already know that digital is a discrete value, either on or off. Here, we see a button press over time. At the start, it is on, so it's pressed, the circuit is complete, and the Arduino receives a 1 or a high signal. After a certain amount of time, the button is released, and we receive a low or an off signal. In digital electronics, when a voltage is above a certain threshold, in this case it's 5 volts, when it's pretty much there at 4.7 it becomes high. And when it's low, this is recognized when the voltage is below 0.3 volts. Don't worry about the particular voltages, we cover this in our examples, but it's just handy knowledge to know. The other type is analog. Analogs have a range between off and on. Motor speed would be an analog output. 0% speed, 10, 50, 100. There are steps between off and maximum. An analog input would be a light sensor. No light, some light, and full light. You might have noticed the markings on the left-hand side here. So, you would have seen off and on, that's fairly obvious, but the 0 and the 255 is a little bit different. The Arduino, because it is actually a digital system, it's breaking down an analog, so a continuous range, into discrete parts so it can understand. So when you read a sensor or when you're outputting, the number that you put to this input or output is between 0 and 255. The reason for that is because everything is in base 2, so it's 2 to the power of something. And when you put 2 to the power of 8, it becomes 255, so it uses an 8-bit analog to digital converter. Just a little bit of extra knowledge, whether or not you needed that. This is a table that covers the analog inputs, analog outputs, digital inputs, digital outputs, and examples of each.